Chicago, 1953. 2 in the morning. Eugene Aserinsky was sitting in a small laboratory at the University of Chicago, watching a machine draw lines on paper. He was exhausted, underfunded, and running out of time. His doctoral program needed results. His advisor needed data, and the only equipment available to him was an old electroencephalograph that the department rarely used, shoved into a storage room like something nobody wanted anymore. He had set it up himself. He had attached the electrodes to his 8-year-old son Armand's scalp. He had waited for the boy to fall asleep on the laboratory bed, then sat down in a chair next to the machine and watched. The ink pens moved in slow, even lines. Normal. Expected. The quiet, electrical murmur of a brain doing nothing remarkable. He almost fell asleep himself. Then, sometime after 2 in the morning, the pens went wild. Violent. Rapid swings across the paper. The kind of signal the machine produced when a person was wide awake and alert. Aserinsky stood up fast, certain something had gone wrong with the equipment. He walked into the next room and looked at his son. Armand was lying still, eyes closed, breathing slowly, clearly asleep. Aserinsky walked back to the machine. The pens were still moving. He looked closer and noticed something else. Under Armand's closed eyelids, his eyes were moving, rapidly, back and forth, as if tracking something that existed only inside his own head. He picked up the phone and called his advisor, Nathaniel Kleitman. He described what he was seeing. Kleitman told him to check the equipment again. Aserinsky checked it. The signal held. The machine was not broken. Something was happening inside that sleeping child that no one in the history of science had ever looked for before. Something active, something that looked, on paper, almost identical to being fully awake. What Aserinsky had stumbled onto that night would eventually be called rapid eye movement sleep. REM, a phase of sleep so electrically alive that in some measurements, a sleeping brain during it is nearly indistinguishable from a brain that is fully conscious. A sleeping brain, doing something that looked nothing like rest. That discovery opened a door, and behind that door was a question that 7 decades of neuroscience have not fully answered. Not because no one has tried, because the question is much larger than anyone expected. Across the animal kingdom, wherever scientists have studied nervous systems carefully, sleep, or something that functions like it keeps appearing, in every major lineage, in creatures as different from us as it is possible to be. Something about the biological logic of being alive with a brain seems to require this specific interval of reduced consciousness, of surrendered awareness, in a world that does not stop being dangerous just because you close your eyes. For hundreds of millions of years, evolution has preserved this at enormous cost. Through mass extinctions, through ice ages, through every pressure that natural selection has ever applied to every creature that has ever lived, it never found a replacement. Which means that whatever was happening inside that boy's skull, whatever made those pens move like that at 2 in the morning, it was important enough that the entire history of life on this planet could not afford to let it go. Every night, you disappear into it. What comes back in the morning? Picture a lioness on the Serengeti at 3 in the morning. She is not hiding. She is not injured. There is no particular reason she cannot move. She is simply lying on her side in the grass. Eyes closed, muscles slack, breathing slow and deep. Every sensory system that keeps her alive is running at a fraction of its normal capacity. Her reaction time is a fraction of what it would be if she were awake. The distance she could cover before a threat reached her is dramatically reduced. She is, by almost every measure that matters on the African savanna, an easy target. And she does this every single day. This is the thing about sleep that most people never stop to examine. We treat it as natural, as obvious, as simply what living things do when they get tired. But from the perspective of hundreds of millions of years of evolution, sleep is one of the strangest and most costly behaviors in the history of life shit on this planet. Think about what natural selection actually does. It is not a designer with intentions or preferences. It is a filter, a slow, indifferent filter that removes anything that consistently costs more than it returns. A trait that makes an animal significantly more likely to die before reproducing will, over enough generations, disappear from the population. That is the mechanism by which every living thing on this planet came to be what it is. Sleep makes animals more likely to die. Every hour a creature spends unconscious is an hour it is not watching for predators, not searching for food, not competing for mates, not doing any of the things that translate directly into survival and reproduction. The cost is real. The cost is measured in lives across deep time. And yet, in every major animal lineage that scientists have examined carefully, sleep has not been eliminated. It has not even been substantially reduced. The average lion sleeps somewhere between 16 and 20 hours a day. The average human sleeps 7 to 8. Bats sleep close to 20. Elephants sleep 2 to 4. The numbers vary enormously across species, shaped by body size and metabolic demands and ecological pressure, but the number never reaches zero. Not for any animal with a complex nervous system. Not anywhere in the evolutionary record that scientists have been able to examine. In 1983, a researcher named Alan Rechtschaffen at the University of Chicago decided to find out what would actually happen if an animal simply could not sleep. He designed an apparatus that became one of the most famous and most unsettling experiments in the history of sleep science. He placed rats on a disc suspended over a shallow pool of water. Electrodes monitored their brain activity continuously. When the readings showed a rat beginning to fall asleep, the disc rotated, nudging the rat toward the water and forcing it awake. A second rat on the other side of the disc was allowed to sleep normally. Both animals had access to the same food and water. Both lived in the same conditions. The only difference between them was sleep. The sleep-deprived rats began to fall apart in ways that nobody anticipated. Their fur started falling out. Wounds appeared on their skin and refused to heal despite no sign of infection. They ate far more than the control rats but lost weight anyway, as if their bodies had lost the ability to use food efficiently. Their core temperature swung in ways that made no physiological sense. Within 2 to 3 weeks, they were dead. Not from any single identifiable organ failure. Not from infection. When Rechtschaffen examined their organs afterward, most of them appeared relatively normal at a gross level. They had simply stopped being able to sustain life. Rechtschaffen wrote in his report that if sleep does not serve an absolutely vital function, it is the biggest mistake evolution ever made. That line has been quoted hundreds of times since, almost always as a rhetorical flourish, a dramatic way of saying that sleep clearly matters. But there is something more important hiding inside it, something that decades of research since have not fully resolved. We still cannot completely explain what those rats died from. Not in the precise, mechanistic way that science requires. Not the exact sequence of biological failures that occurs when sleep is completely removed. Rechtschaffen spent years trying to answer that question. Other researchers have spent years since. The question has generated entire careers and entire laboratories. The answer remains incomplete. That gap is not a minor detail. It is a fundamental one. Sleep is so woven into the basic operation of animal biology that removing it causes the entire system to fail in ways that are difficult to trace to any single source. Every system fails. Everything unravels at once, which tells you something important about what sleep actually is. It is not a feature that evolution added to animal biology at some point. It is not an optional refinement. It is something closer to a foundation, a condition that an enormous range of biological processes depend on so completely that removing it does not break one thing. It breaks the capacity of the whole to hold together. Over deep time, costly traits survive when they are tied to benefits powerful enough to offset their price, or when the organism simply cannot be built without them. Sleep appears to be both. The question evolution already answered is whether sleep is worth the price. Hundreds of millions of years of preserved vulnerability is the answer. The question that remains is what it is buying. In 2021, a team of researchers at Caltech published a paper about jellyfish, specifically about a species called Cassiopeia. It spends most of its life sitting upside down on the seafloor, pulsing its bell slowly, filtering whatever drifts into its tentacles. It has no brain, no centralized nervous system in any meaningful sense. It is, by almost any measure, one of the simplest animals on the planet. The researchers noticed something strange. At night, the jellyfish pulsed more slowly. Its movements became less frequent. Its response to disturbance was delayed. And when the team kept individual jellyfish awake through the night by periodically disturbing them, those animals showed something unexpected the following day. They were slower, less responsive, as if they needed to recover from something. A jellyfish, with no brain, behaving as if it had accumulated a debt that rest needed to repay. The researchers were careful with their language. As good scientists are, they did not claim the jellyfish was dreaming. They did not claim it experienced anything at all in any conscious sense. What they documented was more specific and more interesting than that. The jellyfish had a rest state that was regulated, that was necessary, and that when disrupted, produced measurable consequences that only reversed when the animal was allowed to rest. The biological logic that would eventually become sleep appears to exist in an animal with no brain to speak of. That finding matters more than it might initially seem. For most of the history of sleep science, the working assumption was that sleep was fundamentally a brain phenomenon. Nervous systems got complex enough, and at some point they needed to go offline periodically to maintain themselves. Sleep was the price of neural complexity. The jellyfish does not fit that story. If something like sleep exists in an animal without a centralized brain, then sleep did not originate as a solution to the problems of complex nervous systems. It originated somewhere deeper, in the more fundamental logic of what it costs to be alive and active. To find that origin, you have to go much further back, several billion years further. The cyanobacteria living in shallow oceans roughly 3.5 billion years ago were among the earliest organisms to photosynthesize, capturing energy directly from sunlight. They had no brain, no nervous system, no nucleus inside their cells. They were as simple as life gets while still being recognizably alive. And they had a clock. Encoded in their chemistry was a feedback loop involving interacting proteins, a molecular cycle that repeated itself with a period of almost exactly 24 hours. Not because the bacteria could sense day and night directly, because the cycle itself was self-sustaining. It would keep running, even in constant darkness, even in a laboratory flask with no external time cues at all. A 3.5 billion-year-old single-celled organism, with no brain and no nervous system, was keeping time. That clock, in enormously evolved forms, is present in almost every living thing on Earth today. The genes involved have changed beyond recognition over billions of years. The basic logic of the mechanism has not. Life learned to track the 24-hour cycle before it learned to do almost anything else we would recognize as sophisticated. That clock matters for sleep because without it, sleep, as animals experience it, could not be organized across the day and night cycle. The clock is not sleep, but it is the scaffold on which sleep is built. It is the reason that sleep happens at predictable times rather than randomly. The reason your body begins preparing for sleep hours before you lie down. The reason shifting your schedule by a few hours leaves you disoriented for days. The clock was there first. Sleep was built on top of it. Much later, as nervous systems became complex enough to need it. But why did nervous systems need it? The answer may go back to a constraint that biology has never fully escaped. Active metabolism and the deepest forms of cellular repair compete for overlapping resources when a system is burning energy at full capacity, doing all the things that being active and alert requires. Certain maintenance processes are suppressed, not because they are unimportant, because doing both at once, fully and simultaneously, appears to be something that biological systems have not found a way to achieve. The solution that life arrived at, long before brains existed, was alternation. Periods of high activity followed by periods of reduced activity during which maintenance could run. In the earliest organisms, this was not sleep in any recognizable sense. It was chemistry taking turns. But the logic was already there. By the time animals with true nervous systems appeared, roughly 500 to 600 million years ago, that alternating logic had been refined by billions of years of selection into something more structured. And when complex brains evolved, they did not create a new need for rest. They inherited an ancient rhythm that had always been there and built their most sophisticated processes on top of it. This is why the jellyfish shows something like sleep, even without a brain. It is not because the jellyfish has secretly complex neurology. It is because the jellyfish is built on the same ancient foundation that everything else is built on. The foundation that says you cannot run everything at once. So you take turns. Sleep is not what complex brains invented. Sleep is what complex brains inherited. And they inherited it from something so old and so fundamental that it predates not just brains, but animals, but the kind of cell that even has a nucleus. The implication of that is significant. It means that every attempt to explain sleep purely in terms of what it does for brains will always be incomplete. What brains do with sleep is real and important, and we will spend considerable time on it. But the story begins somewhere far deeper, in the chemical logic of cells that had no choice but to take turns, in a molecular clock that was already running billions of years before the first neuron ever fired. When nervous systems finally appeared, sleep was not a new invention waiting to happen. It was an old constraint dressed in new architecture, and that architecture was about to be tested in ways that no jellyfish pulsing on a seafloor could have prepared it for. Because the world that complex nervous systems appeared in was not the quiet chemical world of ancient oceans. It was a world where other things were trying to eat you. Read the sleeping habits of an animal carefully enough, and you can reconstruct the world that made it. Not the world it lives in today, the world that shaped it. The specific threats, The specific physical constraints, the specific pressures that acted on its ancestors over millions of generations until the way it sleeps became exactly what it is. Sleep is not just a biological necessity. It is a record. A detailed record of fear and danger pressed into the nervous system by the slow accumulation of consequence. Every unusual thing an animal does with sleep is a clue. Every strange adaptation that bends sleep into an unexpected shape is evidence of a specific problem that had to be solved. And when you read those shapes carefully, the history written into them is precise enough to be almost forensic. Start in the ocean, roughly 50 million years ago, when a group of four-legged land mammals began returning to the water. The ancestors of modern dolphins had spent tens of millions of years living on land. They breathed air. They had nervous systems built around the same ancient sleep rhythms that all mammals inherited. When their lineage began its slow return to the ocean, everything about their biology had to renegotiate with the demands of water. Their limbs changed shape. Their nostrils migrated toward the top of their heads. Their bodies became streamlined. But two things would not renegotiate. They still needed to breathe air at the surface, and they still needed to sleep. An animal that breathes air and lives in the ocean faces a problem with no clean solution. During sleep, if the body relaxes deeply enough to allow genuine rest, the animal stops swimming. If it stops swimming, it sinks. If it sinks away from the surface, it cannot breathe. If it cannot breathe, it dies. The dolphin's answer to this problem is one of the most remarkable things in the history of animal biology. It sleeps one hemisphere of its brain at a time. While one side of the brain enters a sleep state, the other side remains awake enough to keep the body swimming in slow, steady circles, awake enough to monitor how far it is from the surface, awake enough to respond if something approaches. The eye connected to the sleeping hemisphere closes. The eye connected to the waking hemisphere stays open. Scanning. After roughly 2 hours, the hemispheres switch. The side that was sleeping wakes. The side that was awake goes to sleep. Brain recordings from sleeping dolphins show that each hemisphere, when it sleeps, produces the full electrical patterns associated with genuine mammalian sleep. Both sides get what they need, just not at the same time. This adaptation was not designed by any intelligence. It was selected by consequence. Every dolphin ancestor whose sleep left it unable to swim, unable to surface, unable to breathe, did not survive to have offspring. Over millions of generations, the ones that could maintain enough function during rest to keep breathing and keep moving, passed that capacity forward. The ones that could not disappeared. The shape of dolphin sleep is the shape of the problem that created it. It is a portrait of water and gravity and the distance between the ocean's surface and the air. Now go to Antarctica. The chinstrap penguin nests in enormous, densely packed colonies on rocky Antarctic shores. During breeding season, a nesting penguin cannot leave its eggs or its chick undefended, not because of aerial predators or ocean predators, because of its neighbors. Penguin colonies are not peaceful places. They are intensely competitive environments where nest materials, particularly the stones used to build and insulate nests, are constantly stolen. A penguin that sleeps too deeply, for too long, in a single uninterrupted stretch, comes back to find its nest dismantled and its stones carried off, eggs exposed, chicks at risk. A team of researchers from the Max Planck Institute spent a breeding season in Antarctica studying this problem. What they found when they published their results in 2023 stopped the scientific community cold. Chinstrap penguins sleep in microsleeps of approximately 4 seconds each, more than 10,000 times per day. The total accumulated sleep across all those tiny episodes adds up to roughly 11 hours across a 24-hour period, which is actually more than many mammals of comparable size. The brain gets what it needs. But no single episode lasts long enough to leave the bird genuinely defenseless. 4 seconds, then awake. 4 seconds, then awake again. More than 10,000 times a day. Every day. Through the entire breeding season. That is not a compromise. That is a solution. It is what happens when the danger is not a predator approaching from outside, but the constant opportunism of 10,000 neighbors who are always watching. Now go into the open Pacific. The northern elephant seal spends months at a time at sea, traveling thousands of miles between its feeding grounds and its breeding beaches. During those ocean journeys, it needs to sleep, and it needs to avoid the great white sharks that patrol the water near the surface. The elephant seal's solution is to sleep on the way down. When it dives, sinking slowly into progressively darker and colder water, it enters something that looks, in brain recordings, like genuine sleep during the descent. Its body rotates slowly as gravity pulls it deeper, a posture that researchers describe as resembling a falling leaf. By the time it reaches depths of 200 to 300 meters, it is resting in water where great white sharks are far less active than in the shallower zones near the surface. Then it wakes, ascends, breathes, and dives again. Its total sleep at sea amounts to less than 2 hours per day, making it among the least sleeping mammals scientists have documented. But those 2 hours are taken from the water column itself, hidden in the one layer of ocean where the specific threat it faces is least likely to be. The shape of elephant seal sleep is the shape of a shark's hunting behavior mapped onto a diving mammal's neurology. 3 animals. 3 completely different solutions to the same fundamental problem. Sleep is necessary. The world does not care. And so the shape of sleep bends, under millions of years of pressure, to fit the specific geometry of the danger that surrounds it. Each shape is a record. Each adaptation is evidence. The dolphin's split consciousness tells you about water and air and the weight of a mammalian body. The penguin's 4-second flickers tell you about social competition and stolen stones. The elephant seal's deep descent tells you about a specific predator and the depth at which that predator hunts. Every sleeping animal is carrying a map of its ancestral dangers pressed into its neurology. Which brings you to the animal reading these words. Human sleep has a shape too. Long, consolidated, deeply unconscious, occurring in darkness. That shape was not chosen. It was pressed into place over hundreds of thousands of years by a specific world. A world of African nights with no artificial light, where the darkness was absolute and genuine. A world of small groups sleeping close together, sharing the work of staying alert. A world where the threats of night were real enough that a brain needed long, protected intervals completely away from the demands of waking life to do what it needed to do. That world no longer exists in the form that shaped this sleep, but the shape remains. And inside that shape, every night, the brain begins doing the things that all of this danger and all of this protection and all of these hundreds of millions of years have been making space for. The first of those things is the one most people least expect. It is cleaning. In the spring of 2014, a woman named Sandra Keeley sat in a neurologist's office in Boston and listened to a doctor tell her that the PET scan of her brain showed patterns consistent with early-stage Alzheimer's disease. She was 57 years old. She had noticed the signs herself over the previous 2 years. Words that used to come easily now hovered just out of reach. Names of people she had known for decades, suddenly gone when she needed them. The particular frustration of standing in a room and having no idea why she had walked into it. Not occasionally, but regularly. Predictably. In a way that felt like something slipping rather than something forgotten. Her neurologist asked her about her sleep. She laughed a little. The way people do when a question seems too simple for the situation. She told him she had been a bad sleeper for most of her adult life. 4 or 5 hours most nights. Sometimes less. She had worn it as a kind of badge in her career. The early mornings. The late nights. The ability to function on less than everyone else seemed to need. The neurologist did not tell her that her sleep had caused her Alzheimer's disease. The relationship between sleep and neurodegeneration is complex, and no responsible physician draws a straight line between one person's sleep history and one person's diagnosis. What he told her instead was something that a team of researchers at the University of Rochester had discovered just the year before. Something that had changed, in a quiet but significant way. How the medical community understood what the brain was actually doing every night. The brain has a cleaning system, not a metaphorical one, a literal, physical, hydraulic system that operates primarily during sleep and that carries waste out of brain tissue in ways that simply do not occur at anywhere near the same efficiency while you are awake. Maiken Nedergaard, the neuroscientist who led the Rochester team, had been studying the brains of mice when she noticed that the physical space between brain cells expanded significantly during sleep. Not slightly. In some measurements, the channels between cells appeared to increase by roughly 60% compared to the waking state. And as those spaces opened, cerebrospinal fluid began moving through brain tissue at a dramatically increased rate, flushing through in pulses that correlated with the slow waves of deep sleep. Nedergaard called it the glymphatic system, after the glial cells that appeared to drive it and the lymphatic system it resembled in function. And what this system carries away turns out to be among the most important waste the body produces. Among the molecules cleared during sleep are beta amyloid and tau protein. These are not exotic foreign substances. They are normal byproducts of normal brain activity. Every time a synapse fires, every time the brain does the ordinary work of thinking and remembering and perceiving, these proteins accumulate in the spaces between cells, in small amounts, cleared regularly. They are harmless. In large amounts, accumulated over years without adequate clearance, they form the plaques and tangles that are the defining physical signature of Alzheimer's disease. Studies in humans have found that even a single night of disrupted sleep measurably increases beta amyloid concentration in the brain the following day. The relationship between chronic sleep disruption over years and elevated amyloid burden over time is one of the more replicated findings in recent neuroscience. Though researchers are careful about the language they use, sleep deprivation does not guarantee Alzheimer's disease. Adequate sleep does not prevent it. The relationship is real and meaningful without being a simple one-to-one cause. But the mechanism is there. The waste accumulates during waking hours because that is the biology of an active brain. The clearance runs most efficiently during sleep because that is when the physical conditions that allow it to operate are present. You cannot replicate those conditions by resting quietly while awake. You cannot achieve them through any waking state. The specific hydraulic changes that allow the glymphatic system to run at full capacity only occur during sleep itself. Sandra Kiley, sitting in that office in Boston, had spent 3 decades giving her brain 4 hours a night to do what it needed 8 to do. She was not unusual. She was not even an outlier. She was a version of something extremely common in contemporary American life. A person who had found ways to feel functional on insufficient sleep for so long that functional had become the new normal. With no way to know what she was losing because the losses were invisible and gradual and cumulative. The glymphatic story is the one most people have heard by now, in some form, but it is only one of the things the brain is doing during those hours. At the same time the clearing is running, the immune system is doing some of its most important work. Certain immune cells patrol tissue most effectively during sleep. When the hormonal environment that governs their circulation shifts in ways that only occur during those hours, the consolidation of immune memory, the process by which the body learns to recognize and respond to pathogens it has encountered, is partly dependent on sleep, in ways that researchers are still mapping in detail. This is why a single week of reduced sleep measurably blunts the immune response to a flu vaccine. The vaccine delivers the antigen. The immune system needs sleep to fully process what it has been given. At the same time, the endocrine system runs its own night program. Growth hormone, which in adults governs tissue repair and metabolic regulation, is released primarily during the deep stages of sleep. Cortisol, the hormone most associated with the stress response, reaches its lowest point of the entire 24-hour cycle in the early hours of sleep. Insulin sensitivity, the measure of how efficiently cells respond to the signal to take up glucose from the bloodstream, is partially reset during sleep in ways that sustained sleep deprivation gradually erode. Each of these processes is real and documented, and each requires the same thing: the specific physiological state that only sleep produces, the changed hormonal environment, the altered neural patterns, the physical conditions that only exist when the waking brain has stepped back. Sleep is not a tool the brain uses. Sleep is the condition under which the brain can continue to be a brain. The distinction matters because of what it implies about what happens when sleep is denied. When you skip a workout, the body misses an opportunity, but keeps functioning. When you skip a meal, it draws on reserves and keeps functioning. When you consistently skip sleep, the systems that can only run in the sleeping state do not run. The clearing does not complete. The immune consolidation does not finish. The hormonal reset does not execute fully. These are not opportunities missed in any abstract sense. They are work that did not get done, outputs that were not produced, maintenance that was deferred with no guarantee of when it would be made up. The brain keeps a tab. You feel that tab as fog, as the slight unreliability of recall, as the words that hover just outside reach, and the names that go missing when you need them. Things that most people explain away as stress or aging or just the way it is. For Sandra Keeley, standing in rooms she had forgotten why she had entered, it was the tab presenting itself for payment. But the night shift is not finished when the cleaning is done. There is another process running at the same time, one that is stranger and more intimate than hydraulics and hormones. One that goes through the day you just lived and makes decisions about it that you will carry forward whether you want to or not. It makes those decisions without asking you. The morning of November 14th, 2003, started the same way. Every morning started for Jill Price. She woke up, and the previous day was already there. Not as a fading memory that she had to reach for. Already there, fully formed. Everything she had said and done and felt and seen on November 13th, presented to her complete and immediate, as if it had happened 10 minutes ago rather than overnight. And behind that day was November 12th. And behind that was November 11th, and behind that was every day stretching back to her early adolescence, each one equally vivid, equally present, equally impossible to put down. Jill Price remembered everything, not in the vague, impressive way that some people remember things better than others. She remembered every day of her life in complete and involuntary detail, every date going back to 1974, every weather, every meal, every conversation, every experience of every ordinary day she had ever lived. She did not recall them the way you might recall a childhood memory when someone prompts you. They arrived constantly, unbidden, triggered by almost anything. A song on the radio, and she was in a car on a specific Tuesday in 1987. A particular smell, and she was back in a kitchen on an afternoon she had not thought about in years. Except that she had thought about it. Because she thought about all of them. All the time. Whether she chose to or not. She had tried for years to explain to the people around her what it was like. They usually responded by saying they wished they had a memory like hers. She had been trying to tell them that they did not. In 2000, she wrote a letter to a memory researcher at the University of California, Irvine, named James McGaugh. She described her condition in careful detail. McGaugh had spent his career studying how memories form and persist. He had never encountered anything like what she described. He invited her to his laboratory and spent years testing her, designing challenges specifically intended to find the limits of what she could do. He found almost none. She was eventually given a name for her condition, hyperthymesia, from the Greek for excessive remembering. McGaugh published his findings. The case attracted significant attention. People called her the woman who could not forget, as if she had been given a gift. In the years since, Jill Price has described what the gift actually feels like in practice. She cannot watch a movie without the first viewing replaying simultaneously with every subsequent viewing she has ever had of the same film, each one tagged with the exact date and every circumstance of watching it. She cannot have a difficult conversation without every previous version of that conversation occurring in parallel. Decades of similar moments arriving at once with the same emotional weight they carried the day they happened. She cannot decide anything quickly because every related experience she has ever had is equally present, equally available, equally insistent on being part of the calculation. She has described living with hyperthymesia as like watching two televisions at once, forever, with no way to turn either one off. She does not experience the past as the past. She experiences it as a permanent, equal part of the present. That description is the clearest possible demonstration of something that memory researchers have come to understand, but that most people have never been told. Memory is not a recording system. The brain is not a camera that captures experience and stores it for later retrieval. If it were, Jill Price would be the pinnacle of human memory. She would be the best version of what memory could be. Instead, she is a demonstration of what memory looks like when a critical function has failed. The function that failed is forgetting. Forgetting is not the enemy of memory. Forgetting is the thing that makes memory useful. The brain does not store experience in order to preserve the past. It stores experience in order to navigate the future. And navigating the future does not require a complete archive of everything that ever happened. It requires a compressed, abstracted, generalized model of how the world works. A model built not from the raw footage of individual moments, but from the patterns that those moments suggest, with the individual moments themselves allowed to fade once they have contributed what they had to offer. To build that model, the brain has to edit continuously. It has to decide which details are load-bearing and which are noise. Which experiences point towards something general and true, and which are exceptions not worth integrating. It has to let things go. That editing happens during sleep. In the decades since Aserinsky's discovery, researchers have built a detailed picture of what the sleeping brain does with the experiences of the day. The hippocampus, the brain structure most involved in forming new memories, replays recent experiences during sleep. Not randomly and not completely. The experiences that get replayed are filtered by emotional significance, by repetition, by how well they connect to things already known. What passes through that filter gets consolidated into longer-term storage, woven into the existing architecture of what you know. What does not pass through begins to fade. At the same time, the synaptic connections strengthened by the day's learning are selectively scaled back, not erased, adjusted downward toward a baseline that keeps the system sensitive to new information. A brain that did not do this would saturate every connection already fully strengthened, with nowhere to go when something new arrived. Sleep keeps the system open for the next day. Matthew Wilson, a neuroscientist at MIT, showed in the 1990s that sleeping rats replay the neural patterns of mazes they had run during the day. The sequences of neural firing that occurred while they physically navigated the corridors fired again during sleep, compressed into a fraction of the original time. The brain was running the experience again, faster, as if reviewing it. But what Wilson found, when he looked more carefully, was stranger still. The rats were not just replaying the paths they had taken. Patterns corresponding to routes through the maze that the rats had never actually run were also appearing during sleep. The sleeping brain was using the day's real experience as raw material to construct and test possibilities, not just filing what happened, running simulations of what could have happened, might happen next, might be worth trying tomorrow. This is what the sleeping brain is doing with your day while you are not there to supervise it. And here is where the story gets uncomfortable, in a way that is easy to miss if you are not paying attention. The brain doing this editing is not neutral. It is not objective. It has preferences, shaped by emotion and attention and the accumulated biases of a lifetime. The memories it strengthens are the ones that feel significant, which is not always the same as the ones that are accurate or useful. The connections it reinforces are the ones that fit the existing model, which means the existing model tends to be confirmed rather than challenged. The sleeping brain is editing you, but it is editing you according to its own criteria, not yours, without your input, without your supervision, without your ability to say, wait, that is not how I want to remember that day, or that person, or that version of myself. Jill Price remembers everything because the editing mechanism does not work the way it should. She carries every version of every day equally, with no selection, no compression, no release. Most people carry only what the sleeping brain decided was worth keeping. The question of whether those decisions are always the right ones, made by the right criteria, is one that neuroscience can describe in increasing detail but cannot fully answer, because it is not only a scientific question, it is a question about who is doing the deciding, and who, exactly, wakes up as a result. Before we get to the full weight of that question, we need to understand what happens when the deciding stops, when a body is forced to go on without the hours that the sleeping brain requires, not for one night, not for two, for 11 days. In a house in San Diego, in the winter of 1963, with a 17-year-old boy who wanted to break a world record, and a sleep researcher who drove down from Stanford, not entirely sure what he was about to witness. Randy Gardner was 17 years old and he wanted to win a science fair. It was December of 1963. He was a student at Point Loma High School in San Diego, California, and he had been trying to think of a project that would stand out from the usual displays of baking soda, volcanoes, and bean sprout experiments. His friend, Bruce McAllister, suggested something simple and dramatic: break the world record for the longest a human being had ever gone without sleep. The record at the time stood at 260 hours. Set by a radio disc jockey named Peter Tripp in 1959, Randy thought he could beat it. He told his parents. His parents were worried, but did not stop him. Word eventually reached William Dement, a sleep researcher at Stanford University, who had spent years working with the science that began in Aserinsky's laboratory. Dement drove down to San Diego to observe. A Navy medical officer named John Ross was assigned to monitor Randy's physical health throughout the attempt. On the morning of December 28, 1963, Randy Gardner stopped sleeping. Nobody in that house fully understood what they were about to watch. The first 2 days passed without much drama. Randy was tired and irritable at times, prone to losing focus during long stretches of stillness. He needed company and activity to stay awake. Basketball games and conversations and music to keep his mind moving. But he was coherent. He was recognizably himself. When you spoke to him, he answered in ways that made sense. Day 3 changed something. John Ross recorded in his notes that Randy was having difficulty with sensory perception. He handed Randy a tube of toothpaste and asked him to identify it without looking at it. Randy held it, turned it over in his hands, felt the shape and the texture of it. He knew something was there, but the information would not complete into a name. The connection between what his hands were telling him and what the object actually was had developed a gap that had not been there before. This was not confusion in the ordinary sense. It pointed towards something specific happening deep in the brain's processing, something that was not yet visible from the outside, but was already, quietly, beginning to come apart. Day 4 brought something more alarming. Randy was standing on a street in San Diego when he looked at a street sign and saw a face looking back at him. He knew the sign was a sign. He could tell you it was a sign, but there was also a face there, overlaid on what he could otherwise still see clearly, present and specific, and not dismissible simply by knowing it should not exist. Two realities were occupying the same perceptual space simultaneously. Dement wrote in his notes that this was the moment he understood the experiment was not going to stay within any boundaries anyone had anticipated. Day 5. Day 6. On the morning of Day 6, Randy Gardner declared that he was Paul Lowe. Paul Lowe was a running back for the San Diego Chargers. Randy Gardner was a 17-year-old high school student who had not slept in nearly a week. He said it with complete conviction. He was not joking, not performing, not doing anything that looked like anything other than genuine belief. When Ross gently pointed out who Randy actually was, Randy became angry. He insisted, for several minutes, the identity was simply real to him. Then it passed, like a wave pulling back from shore. Randy returned to himself and did not remember having claimed to be anyone else. Dement described it in his records, not as a psychotic break in any clinical sense, but as something he did not have precise language for. The continuous narrative structure that stitches experience and memory and identity into a person had briefly lost its coherence. It had not shattered. It had flickered, gone out for a few minutes, come back, as if the thing that makes you you was not a fixed structure, but an ongoing process, one that required maintenance, and the maintenance had been skipped too many nights in a row. By Day 9, Randy could not complete sentences. He would begin a thought, reach somewhere in the middle of it, and stop. Not because the words were gone, because the thought itself had disappeared while he was still inside it. The thread connecting where a sentence started to where it was going had simply vanished in transit. He would look at whoever he was speaking to with an expression that was partly confused and partly apologetic, aware that something had failed, but unable to identify what. Short-term memory was deteriorating in ways that were measurable and specific. Dement would ask Randy a question. Randy would answer. And 30 seconds later, Randy would have no recollection of being asked anything at all. Each moment was becoming increasingly disconnected from the moment before it. The stream of consciousness that most people experience as the basic texture of being awake was breaking into isolated pools with no current running between them. By day 10, Ross sat Randy down for a series of standard cognitive tests. He asked Randy to count backward from 100 by sevens. Randy started, stopped after a few steps, forgot what he was doing. When reminded, started again, stopped again within seconds. The thing failing was not his intelligence. It was continuity. On the morning of January 8th, 1964, Randy Gardner sat in front of a room full of journalists and answered their questions. He was coherent enough to impress people who had not watched the previous 11 days. He was coherent enough that some of the reporters present left thinking the whole enterprise had been less dramatic than advertised. Then he went home and slept for 14 hours and 40 minutes. When he woke up, he was largely himself again. His cognitive scores recovered. He went back to school. He graduated. He went on to live what looked, from the outside, like an ordinary life. Researchers who studied the Gardner case in the years that followed noted something important about what had been happening neurologically in those final days. Under conditions of extreme sleep deprivation, studies have documented that local regions of the brain can briefly enter sleep-like states while a person remains outwardly awake and functional. Specific areas go offline for seconds at a time, while adjacent areas keep running. The sleeper does not know this is happening. From the outside, nothing is visible, but the sleeping region stops processing normally for the duration, and whatever task it was performing falls apart for those few seconds before the region comes back online. This helps explain what Dement was observing toward the end. The face on the street sign was likely the visual processing cortex, briefly entering a sleep-like state, while Randy's eyes remained open. The offline region, generating imagery that the still waking parts of his brain then incorporated into perception. The lost sentences were the prefrontal structures responsible for maintaining the thread of thought going briefly offline mid-sentence. The thread snapping because the part of the brain holding it had taken a few seconds of unauthorized sleep. Randy Gardner was not awake for 264 hours. His body was kept upright and moving for 264 hours, but his brain, piece by piece, in fragments too brief to register in consciousness, kept taking the sleep it needed by the only means left available to it. The record was broken. The experiment was over. The story seemed to have a tidy ending. It did not. In an interview recorded in 2017, Randy Gardner talked about his sleep in the decades since. He had developed severe chronic insomnia at some point in the years after the experiment. Not immediately, not as a direct aftermath, but gradually, building over time, becoming a persistent feature of his nights, lying awake for hours, his mind running when he needed it to stop. The threshold that had once been automatic and effortless, no longer arriving when he wanted it. He said he did not know whether the experiment had caused it. No one can say that with certainty. The connection between a single episode of extreme sleep deprivation in adolescence and chronic insomnia across a lifetime is not something current research can establish as direct cause and effect. But he said he thought about it. He said that lying awake in the dark, he sometimes thought about the boy he had been at 17, and the record he had wanted to break, and the 14 hours and 40 minutes at the end. He said, "I think this is my payback." The boy who proved a human being could survive 11 days without sleep became a man who could not reliably get through a single night. Whatever sleep does in those dark hours, whatever process Randy Gardner interrupted for 264 consecutive hours, it is not a process that simply resumes as if nothing happened. It adjusts. It remembers in some way that has nothing to do with conscious memory. The debt that was run up, and it presents that debt in ways that cannot always be negotiated away. What Randy Gardner's story reveals is not that humans can endure without sleep. Endurance was never the right question. The right question was always what it costs. What it costs the brain. What it costs the identity. What it costs the continuous thread of experience that a person mistakes every waking moment for the simple fact of being themselves. Sleep deprivation does not kill you the way a bullet kills you. It does something slower and in some ways stranger. It dismantles the machinery of being a person, piece by piece, starting with the pieces you would least expect to be optional, and working inward from there. But what Randy Gardner survived, as devastating as it was temporary. He could sleep again when it was over. The debt could eventually be partially repaid. There is a family in Italy for whom that was never true, for whom the debt came due and the payment was not sleep. The payment was everything. In the spring of 1984, a man in his early 50s came to a hospital in Venice, Italy, complaining that he could not sleep. He did not mean he was sleeping poorly. He did not mean he was waking in the night or struggling to fall asleep after stress. He meant that the state of sleep, as something he could reliably enter, had become genuinely unavailable to him. He would lie down. His body would be still. Hours would pass. The threshold that every other human being crosses without effort or thought simply would not come. His physicians found no obvious cause. His anxiety was elevated. Understandably, his heart rate was irregular in ways that were hard to pin down. His temperature fluctuated without clear reason. They treated what they could identify and waited. It got worse. Over the following weeks and months, what had begun as severe insomnia deepened into something that medicine did not yet have a proper category for. The man began experiencing episodes that resembled dreaming while he was still partially awake. Visual phenomena bleeding into waking consciousness. He began to sweat continuously, soaking through clothing in air-conditioned rooms. His body having lost the ability to regulate its own temperature. His movements became uncoordinated. His autonomic functions, the heart rate and blood pressure and breathing and digestion that a body manages without conscious instruction, began to drift out of calibration in ways that could not be corrected. He died 9 months after his first symptoms appeared. His family was devastated and bewildered. They buried him and tried to understand what had happened. And as time passed, some of them began to notice a pattern in the family's history that they had never assembled into a complete picture before. There had been others, men and women in previous generations who had developed, in their 40s and 50s, a progressive inability to sleep. The same sweating, the same loss of coordination, the same frightening drift of functions that should have been automatic, always fatal, always within months to a couple of years of the first symptoms. The family could trace it back at least 5 generations. They brought this history to researchers. Geneticists and neurologists began to look more carefully. What they found, published in a landmark paper in 1992 by Pierluigi Gambetti and colleagues in Cleveland, was a specific mutation, a single change at a particular position in the PRNP gene, which codes for a protein found throughout the brain and body. The mutation causes this protein to fold incorrectly. Misfolded prion proteins are catastrophically capable of converting normal proteins of the same type into misfolded versions. One becomes many. The aggregates accumulate. And, in the case of this particular mutation, they concentrate with devastating specificity in a region of the brain called the thalamus. The thalamus sits at a critical junction in the brain's architecture. It processes and directs sensory information toward the appropriate cortical regions. It coordinates the transitions between sleeping and waking. It helps maintain the rhythmic electrical patterns that characterize different states of brain activity. When the thalamus is progressively destroyed by accumulating protein aggregates, the brain loses the ability to generate the sleep state. Not impaired, not degraded. The circuitry that creates sleep is gone. The condition was named fatal familial insomnia in known affected families. The mutation is devastatingly penetrant. Most carriers who reach the age of onset will develop the disease. Though age of onset and the speed of progression can vary between individuals, there are no treatments that arrest it. There is no intervention that restores the lost sleep. Every case that has fully developed has followed the same direction. What the disease reveals about sleep cannot be replicated by any voluntary experiment, because it shows, with a terrible precision, that nothing else in the scientific record provides. What sleep actually sustains. The patients do not die from exhaustion in any simple sense. Their neurons continue to fire. In the early stages, many patients remain intellectually clear, aware of exactly what is happening to them, capable of discussing their condition with the researchers studying their cases. One patient, a journalist, wrote extensively about the experience. He described being fully present, fully conscious, watching his own body lose its ability to regulate itself, while he could do nothing to stop any of it. What fails, systematically and progressively, is coordination. The autonomic nervous system, which governs heart rate and blood pressure and temperature and breathing and digestion, begins to lose its calibration. The rhythms that normally govern these systems, rhythms that are partially set and reset during sleep, begin to drift away from their normal ranges. The heart rate becomes erratic. Body temperature loses its daily cycle and begins swinging without cause. Digestion becomes unreliable. Blood pressure responds to the wrong signals at the wrong times. Sleep, it turns out, is not simply one process among many that the body runs during the night. It is a signal, a regulatory signal that the body's systems use to synchronize with each other, to confirm where they are in the daily cycle, to reset toward the parameters that normal function requires. When that signal disappears, the systems do not immediately fail. They keep running, but they run without coordination, without reference to each other, without the periodic calibration that sleep normally provides. Over months, the accumulated drift of uncoordinated systems becomes incompatible with life. Sleep is not the maintenance of the brain. Sleep is the maintenance of the whole. Roughly 50 to 60 families worldwide are currently known to carry the fatal familial insomnia mutation. Some adult members of these families have chosen genetic testing. Some have chosen not to know. For those in whom the disease activates, the course is fixed. Researchers have attempted experimental approaches born of desperation. None have been shown to significantly alter what happens. The FFI families have given science something that no other source could provide. Not a measure of what sleep contributes to health or performance or mood. A measure of what sleep is, what it does that nothing else does, what it maintains that cannot be maintained by any other means. The answer is not a single organ. It is the architecture of coordination itself, the scaffold that holds the relationship between brain and body, between one biological system and another, between the present moment and the 24-hour cycle that all of them depend on. But within that architecture, within all the maintenance and the coordination and the hormonal regulation and the waste clearance, there is one part of what sleep does that stands entirely apart, one part that is stranger than all the rest, one part that Aserinsky's machine was recording in 1953, the part that made those ink pens move in ways that looked nothing like sleep was supposed to look, the part where the brain stops maintaining the body and starts building a world. On a Tuesday night in 2009, a 63-year-old retired engineer named Don Dorff got out of bed in his home in suburban Minneapolis, walked to his bedroom closet, opened it, and began throwing his clothes onto the floor. His wife, Norma, woke to the sound of him rummaging. She turned on the lamp and asked what he was doing. Don told her he was looking for the ball. Norma asked what ball. Don said there was a ball somewhere in there, and he needed to find it. He was perfectly calm. He was not distressed. He was simply a man looking for a ball that he was absolutely certain was hidden somewhere among his hanging shirts and folded sweaters. Norma recognized what was happening. It had happened before. She spoke to him quietly, the way she had learned to, and guided him back to bed. In the morning, Don would not remember any of it. He would sit at the kitchen table, drinking his coffee, with no recollection of standing in the closet at midnight, certain of something that had no existence anywhere outside his own sleeping mind. Don Dorff had REM sleep behavior disorder. His brain, during the phase of sleep when the most vivid dreaming occurs, was not keeping his day-body still. The system that normally holds the body in a state of near-complete muscle paralysis during dreaming had stopped working correctly. When Don dreamed, his body moved. When he dreamed, he was searching for something. He searched. When he dreamed he was throwing something, he threw. When he dreamed he was running from something. Norma had learned to move quickly. She had sustained bruises. She had learned to put pillows along the edge of the bed. She had learned to speak quietly and move slowly when she woke him, because startling him out of a vivid dream could produce a physical response before his waking mind had fully taken control. Don was not a violent man. He was not having psychiatric episodes. He was doing, visibly and physically, what every sleeping human brain does every single night. He was acting out his dreams. The reason most people do not do this is a system that most people have never heard of. During REM sleep, as the dreaming brain constructs its vivid, inhabited worlds, the brainstem sends a signal down through the spinal cord to the motor neurons controlling voluntary movement. The signal is inhibitory. It tells those neurons to stop responding to commands from above. The voluntary muscles of the body, with the exception of the diaphragm and the muscles that move the eyes, enter a state of functional paralysis. This is called REM atonia, and it is not a side effect of sleep. It is not the body being too tired to move. It is a deliberate, active, neurologically generated process. The brain paralyzes the body during dreaming because the brain is issuing movement commands during dreaming. The motor cortex is active. It is telling the legs to run, telling the arms to reach and throw and grab, telling the voice to shout. These commands are real in the only sense that matters. The neural signals generating them are genuine. Without atonia, without the brainstem intercepting them before they reach the muscles, the body would act on every one. A person dreaming of running would run. A person dreaming of fighting would fight. A person dreaming of falling and catching a ledge would grab. The only reason you wake up in the same place you went to sleep is that a separate biological system exists specifically to hold your body still while your brain lives in another world entirely. Don Dorf's brainstem was not intercepting the signals correctly. So, the world he was living in at midnight, the world where there was definitely a ball in that closet and he needed to find it, expressed itself in his bedroom in suburban Minneapolis, through his real hands and his real feet and his real voice, while Norma watched from the lamplit bed. The existence of this disorder is the clearest possible evidence of what normal REM sleep actually contains. The commands are always there. The movements are always being generated. The only difference between Don Dorf at midnight and anyone else at midnight is a brainstem circuit that is either working or not. Now go to the other side of the same boundary. Sleep paralysis occurs when that circuit runs in reverse. Consciousness returns before atonia releases. The person becomes aware, recognizably awake, able to perceive the room around them with normal waking clarity, and they cannot move. The brainstem signal is still running. The motor neurons are still being suppressed. The commands that consciousness is now generating, to sit up, to turn on a light, to move a hand, are being intercepted by the same system that was just intercepting the dream commands. Waking has returned. The body has not yet been given back. What almost everyone who experiences this reports, across every culture that has documented it, across every century that has recorded it, is a presence. Something in the room, a figure at the foot of the bed, a weight on the chest making breathing feel labored, a shadow in the corner that the eyes can see and the rational mind knows should not be there, and that the perceptual system insists, with complete authority, is real. What is happening is precise and explicable. The dreaming machinery of REM sleep, which was running moments before, has not fully shut down. The systems that construct perceptual experience are still partly in their REM configuration, still capable of generating imagery, still running the models that produce the sensory reality of the dream world, but consciousness is now present and receiving genuine sensory information from the actual room. Both systems are running at once, the real room and the dream machinery. And the dream machinery, without a fully assembled dream to occupy it, generates something ambient, something present without a specific form, something that has the felt quality of a being rather than an object. Different cultures across thousands of years have given different names to this presence. In Newfoundland, the old hag. In Japan, Kanashibari. In medieval Europe, the incubus and the succubus. In Thailand, the Phaeam. In the sleep paralysis literature of nearly every culture with written records, some version of the same thing. A creature that arrives in the night when you cannot move, that sits on your chest, that watches you from the corner. That is terrifying, precisely because it is so completely, undeniably there. Every one of those creatures is the dream machinery running in a room it was not meant to occupy. Every one of them is as real as any other perceptual experience, because they are generated by the same system that generates every other perceptual experience you have ever had. Which brings you to the question that the existence of REM sleep and REM atonia and REM behavior disorder and sleep paralysis all point toward together. If the brain builds a complete inhabited sensory reality every night during sleep, using the same systems that build your experience of the waking world. Then, what exactly is the relationship between those two realities? Go back to Eugene Aserinsky, lying on that laboratory bed in Chicago in 1953, eyes moving beneath their lids, while the pens recorded the storm of his sleeping brain. He was somewhere else. The visual cortex at the back of his brain was generating images. The regions responsible for emotion were producing feelings in response to those images. The motor cortex was issuing movement commands that his brainstem was correctly intercepting before they reached his muscles. The narrative structures of his frontal lobe were assembling all of it into something with sequence and meaning and the full texture of lived experience. And Armand, inside that assembled reality, believed in it completely. There was no part of him, in that moment, that knew he was on a laboratory bed. There was no alarm, no signal, no internal marker that said, "This is not real." The experience he was having was, to every system in his brain capable of evaluating such a thing, indistinguishable from experience. The brain constructs reality. During waking hours, it constructs it from a continuous stream of sensory data arriving from the world outside. During REM sleep, it constructs it from memory and association and emotion. With sensory input dramatically reduced, the machinery doing the constructing is the same machinery. The result, from the inside, feels the same. This is not a philosophical argument. It is a description of the neurology. The waking experience you are having right now is a construction. The sleeping brain's nightly construction is also a construction. The difference is in the source of the raw material, and in the presence or absence of the systems that the waking brain uses to anchor its construction to the world outside itself. When those anchoring systems are absent, as they are during sleep, the construction runs on internal material alone. And when those anchoring systems are only partially present, as they are during sleep paralysis, the internal material bleeds into the room and stands at the foot of the bed. Don Dorff threw his clothes out of a closet because his brain was not holding his body still while it ran its nightly construction. Every other night of his life, and every other night of every sleeping person's life, the construction runs at full intensity, and the body is held still, and the person lying in the dark has no idea what is happening in the theater inside their own skull. Every night, your brain generates a reality compelling enough that a separate biological system exists to prevent your body from acting on it. That is what Aserinsky's machine was recording. That is what those ink pens were trying to describe. The thing happening inside the sleeping child was not rest. It was not even close to rest. In the autumn of 1879, Thomas Edison stood in his laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, and watched a carbonized cotton filament glow inside a glass bulb for 13.5 hours without burning out. He had solved the practical problem he had been working on for more than a year. A light bulb that could burn long enough, cheaply enough, reliably enough to change how people lived. He knew what he had. He said so to the reporters who came to see it, demonstrated. What he did not say, and what he likely did not fully understand, was that he had also built something else, something much less intentional. He had built the first practical tool for arguing with night, for telling the biological systems that had been synchronized to the rotation of the Earth for billions of years that the rotation of the Earth was no longer the point. Within a decade, electric lighting was spreading through American cities. Within 2 decades, the basic rhythm that every living thing on the planet had organized itself around, the rising and falling of the sun, the reliable arrival of darkness. The cue that told every circadian clock in every cell of every body what time it was, had been made optional for the first time in the history of life. Edison himself had strong opinions about what this meant. He called sleep a waste of time. He said in various interviews that it was a relic of primitive existence, a habit left over from ancestors who had no choice but to stop when the light failed. He slept 4 hours a night, he told journalists, and he had no interest in sleeping more. What Edison did not mention in those interviews was the cot. He kept a cot in his laboratory at Menlo Park, and another at his later laboratory in West Orange. His assistants were familiar with finding him asleep on it at irregular hours throughout the day, multiple times between morning and evening. Sometimes brief, unannounced, completely unapologetic naps that his staff learned to work around. The man who told the world that sleep was a primitive waste of time was distributing his sleep across the day in fragments because his body would not let him simply not have it. He had not conquered sleep. He had rearranged it, spread it thin, pushed it into corners where the journalists could not see it. He was doing, in his private life, what every animal that has ever tried to reduce its sleep eventually does, finding a way to get it anyway. The world Edison helped create did not know about the cot. The world Edison helped create heard the interviews and read the quotes and absorbed the message that productive, serious, ambitious people did not waste time sleeping. That message has compounded for 150 years. To understand what that compounding has actually done, you need to understand something about how the body decides when to sleep. Tucked behind the eyes, in a region of the brain called the hypothalamus, sits a cluster of roughly 20,000 neurons called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This structure functions as the master clock of the human body. It receives light information directly from the retina through a dedicated pathway, and it uses that information to synchronize the rhythms of virtually every organ and biological system with the 24-hour cycle of the Earth. The photoreceptors that feed this clock are most sensitive to short-wavelength blue light, in a range that corresponds closely to the blue content of natural daylight. This is not accidental. The system was calibrated over an enormous span of evolutionary time to use the specific spectral quality of sunlight as its primary input. Blue-rich light means daytime. The fading of blue-rich light means evening. The absence of it means night. The screens of smartphones, tablets, computers, and televisions emit light that is rich in exactly these wavelengths. The LED lighting that has replaced incandescent bulbs in most American homes is similarly blue-shifted. When you look at a phone screen at 11 at night, the photoreceptors behind your eyes receive a signal that is, spectrally, not very different from looking at the sky on a bright morning. The suprachiasmatic nucleus reads that signal. It suppresses melatonin. It tells the body that it is still afternoon. The body is not confused by this. It is responding correctly to what it is being told. What it is being told is wrong. Sarah Maddox is a 34-year-old emergency room nurse in Houston, Texas. She works 3 12-hour night shifts per week, rotating with colleagues across a department that never closes. She has done this for 6 years. She is good at her job. Her colleagues respect her. Her patients, when they are coherent enough to notice, respond well to her. She has not slept at a normal hour in 6 years. Her schedule requires her to sleep during the day and work during the night, which means her circadian system is perpetually arguing with her schedule. The melatonin that should rise in the evening rises in the morning instead. The cortisol that should peak at dawn to prepare her for the day peaks in the early afternoon when she is trying to sleep. She experiences what chronobiologists call circadian misalignment, a state in which the body's internal timing is out of sync with the external world and with itself. She describes the feeling as never quite being fully in the present, like watching her own life through a window rather than living it directly. She knows this is not normal. She does not know how to fix it without a different career. Sarah Maddox is one of roughly 15 million Americans who work night shifts. She is one of the people who keep hospitals running and airports open and emergency services available in the hours when human biology was not designed to be alert and productive. The services are necessary. The biological cost of providing them falls entirely on the people who provide them. Night shift workers show elevated rates of metabolic disorder, cardiovascular disease, and certain cancers at rates that researchers have attributed specifically to chronic circadian disruption. Not to the stress of the work, not to the physical demands of the job, to the timing, to the sustained mismatch between when the body expects to sleep and when it is required to be awake. And then there is everyone else. In 2020, the CDC reported that roughly 1 in 3 American adults regularly sleeps fewer than 7 hours per night. This is not primarily a problem of individual discipline or personal choice. It is the predictable outcome of a society that built its economic and social structures around the assumption that the hours between 8 at night and 6 in the morning were available to fill with productive activity, and that the biological requirements of the humans operating within that structure were negotiable by sufficient motivation. They are not negotiable. They have never been negotiable. The only thing that has changed is the scale at which human beings are finding that out. The dolphin split its brain to protect its sleep from the ocean. The chinstrap penguin fragmented its sleep into 4-second pieces to protect it from its neighbors. The elephant seal dove 300 meters to protect it from a shark. Every one of those adaptations preserved the core of what sleep provides. The total hours, the biological processes, the fundamental maintenance. None of those animals found a way to simply decide that the core was optional. The one animal that developed the intelligence to understand everything in this story has spent 150 years building a civilization on the assumption that it could. 500 million years of evolutionary history has an answer to that assumption. It does not negotiate. It does not adapt on a schedule that fits a century of industrial economics. It waits. And every night, regardless of the schedule posted on the break room wall, regardless of the emails still unanswered, regardless of what the culture has decided that serious and ambitious people do with their time after dark, the systems that sleep maintains send the same signal they have been sending since before the first human being ever drew breath. They say it is time, and something in you, something much older and much less optional than your opinions about productivity, listens. Tonight, at some point, you will stop, not because you chose the moment, not because you prepared for it or made a decision about it. The adenosine that has been accumulating in your brain since the moment you woke up this morning will reach a concentration that the waking system cannot hold against. Your core temperature will begin to drop by a degree or two, pulling you toward the state that drop is designed to induce. The suprachiasmatic nucleus will read the shift in light and begin releasing melatonin into your bloodstream. The muscles along your spine will soften in ways you will not notice, because you will already be losing the capacity to notice much of anything. And then there will be a moment, a specific moment, measurable in the electrical activity of your brain, when you are still you, in the way that you are, you right now, with a continuous thread of experience connecting this sentence to everything that happened to you today. And then you will not be. The thread will simply end, not cut, not interrupted, finished. the way a signal stops at the edge of its range. You have crossed that threshold thousands of times. You have never once experienced it. Because the part of you that experiences things is precisely what stops at that moment. You have only ever known the approach and the aftermath, never the thing itself. What happens on the other side is what this entire story has been about. In the dark, without your supervision, without your input, without the part of you that has opinions about how this should go, a Salamvik begins that could not begin while you were awake. The channels between your brain cells open. Fluid moves through tissue at rates that the waking state does not allow, carrying away the proteins that accumulated while you were thinking and remembering and moving through your day. The proteins that, if left to accumulate across years and decades, would begin to form the plaques that mark the slow destruction of memory. Your brain is cleaning itself. It can only do this when you are not there to interrupt it. At the same time, your immune system is running its night program. Your hormonal systems are cycling through the resets that the waking day does not allow. Somewhere in the architecture of your sleeping brain, the experiences of this specific day are being sorted. The ones that mattered, by whatever criteria the sleeping brain applies to that judgment, are being consolidated. The ones that did not are beginning to fade. By morning, some things that happened today will be clearer in your memory than they were this evening. Others will already be dimmer. The sleeping brain is making those decisions now. In the dark, without asking, you will not know what it decided until you wake up and discover what you remember. And then, at some point in the night, your brain stem will send a signal down your spinal cord and your voluntary muscles will go still. The dreaming will begin. Your brain will start building a world from memory and emotion and the deep associative patterns of a lifetime. And it will build that world with the same systems that are building your experience of this moment right now. The construction will be complete. It will be inhabited. It will feel from inside it exactly like reality feels. Because the machinery making it is the same machinery that makes reality. Your body will be held still while this happens. Not because you are too tired to move, because a separate biological system will be actively preventing your body from acting on what your brain is experiencing. The commands will be issued. The signals will travel down from the motor cortex. They will be intercepted before they reach your muscles. The brainstem will hold you still, while your brain lives somewhere else entirely. You will not know any of this is happening. This is what Eugene Aserinsky saw on that machine in Chicago in 1953. This is what made the ink pens move like that at 2 a.m. His son Armand was not resting. Armand was somewhere else, in a world his sleeping brain had built, held still by a system his father would not fully understand for years. While the machine scratched its frantic record on the paper and Aserinsky stood there in the dark trying to figure out what he was looking at. He was looking at this. He was looking at what you will do tonight. In a few hours, whether you are ready or not. Now think about what had to happen for you to be able to do it. A jellyfish with no brain had to accumulate a version of this need in waters that no longer exist. A molecular clock had to start running in single-celled organisms 3.5 billion years ago and had to keep running through every catastrophe and every extinction and every transformation that life has undergone since. A dolphin had to split its consciousness in half to keep breathing while it slept. A penguin had to learn to sleep in 4-second pieces to keep its nest from being stolen. An elephant seal had to learn to fall asleep on the way down into dark water to stay out of reach of the thing that wanted to eat it. And a species that developed the intelligence to understand all of this spent the last 150 years building a world that argues against it every single night. The adenosine does not care about any of that. The melatonin does not care. The brainstem circuit that will hold you still while you dream does not care what is still open on your laptop or what tomorrow requires or what the culture around you has decided that serious people do with their evenings. 500 million years of preserved vulnerability is not interested in your schedule. It is only interested in one thing. The thing it has always been interested in. The thing it has bent and split and fragmented and hidden 300 meters under the Pacific Ocean to protect. The thing that Randy Gardner's brain stole in 2-second fragments when he tried to deny it for 11 days. The thing that a family in Italy lost to a single misfolded protein and did not survive losing. The interval of absence. The specific hours in the dark, when the things that can only happen in the dark can happen. Tonight you will lie down. The room will become less important. The thoughts that felt urgent an hour ago will begin to lose their grip. The self that has been running all day, making decisions and holding plans and maintaining the continuous story of being you, will begin to soften at its edges. There is a moment just before the threshold that almost no one pays attention to. The narrowing, the way the world pulls back, the way consciousness becomes a smaller and smaller room until it is no room at all. Pay attention to it tonight. Not to stop it, not to study it, just to notice that it is happening, that you are about to cross something you have crossed thousands of times and never once witnessed. On the other side of that moment, in the hours you will not remember, something ancient and non-negotiable will be taking care of the parts of you that you do not know how to take care of yourself. And in the morning, something will wake up and call itself you. It will have your memories, most of them, edited by decisions you did not make. It will have your voice and your habits and your understanding of where you are and what your life is. It will pick up the thread so smoothly that the gap will be invisible. It always is. But the gap was there. It is there every night. And in that gap, something is working. Something older than your name. Older than your language. Older than the species you belong to. Something that has been working in the dark since before anything on this planet had a brain to think about what working in the dark might mean. Go to sleep.